Hello and welcome to Looking for DM step-by-step guide on how to paint a witch hunter. This guide can be used for painting a witch hunter for use in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay or in Warhammer Fantasy Battles. The idea on this guide is it's going to give you a brief idea on how to paint a model from Artel W Miniatures, which is a Russian company that specialises in fantasy and futuristic high-quality resin models. It is a company, as I said, based in Russia, so shipping is delayed by a couple of weeks as opposed to shipping from the UK to Ireland or in Europe itself, but it's well worth the wait. Actually, when it arrived, as you can see from the picture, it actually came in a wax sealed parcel, which to me is pretty awesome. The quality of the model was fairly good when it arrived. There was hardly any mold lines or extra resin sort of that needed to be clipped off, so this saved a lot of time when building it. It's important to note that when you are gluing a resin model, try not to use plastic glues, as they might, dissolve the plastic a bit too much when forming the bonding. So your best bet is to use a high quality super glue. Now the super glue I used is actually from Citadel, and just as a side note, all the paints I used for painting this model are actually supplied by Citadel. Some of them might be a bit older than the current batch, so the names might be a bit different, but you can just use their up-to-date names or colours to change between the two. And again, there's a lot of choice when you're painting a model anyway, so you can always come to your own conclusions or follow your own themes for your armies or your characters. So as I said, Artel W Miniatures is the supplier, so big shout out to them. The reason I used their model is as I was actually looking for a witch hunter model from Citadel and Games Workshop, but there wasn't really anything that really stood out that actually matched the lore, which I thought was a bit strange, considering they're the people that created the lore. But as you can see from this model, it actually does look pretty dark and grim, and there's a poor unfortunate zombie that's in the process of being re-slain, which kind of adds a bit of character to the model. So the first step, without further ado, was to undercoat the model. I generally go by the theme of using 3 different undercoats, depending on how I want my model to look. You have skull white if you want it to be a bit more colourful, make it stand out. Have a lighter colour in most circumstances, it will make it sort of stand out a bit more. You can get chaos black, which will add a bit more quality to the shading, but again it brings the tone of the model down, which could quite possibly have suited the model that we're using for the witch hunter. However, I wanted to have a bit of colour to it because it is a character model, and but I still wanted it to kind of have a bit of a darker hue to it as well to meet the character. Also adds the fact that the whole model is pretty much covered in leather. A brownish undercoat such as Xandri dust seemed to be the best choice, so that's what I went with. The base layer, as I said, is basically covering the majority of the model in a leathery sort of colour, so I went for Rhinox hide. It's a very dark colour, but it means we've got plenty to work from when adding a bit more highlight into the model. I also used the Rhinox hide for the base of the model. On the previews, you won't actually see this until the very end. My thinking is, as you're painting, there's going to be a bit of paint that gets splashed there, so rather than paint it twice, just wait till the end to do it. Now, next section I based was the cloth area. I chose red. The colour actually I have is an older one, which is scab red, but I think it's called cornate red now. It might be something along the lines of red gore as well, but basically you can choose whatever colours you want to match the province or where your character is from. The choice is up to you. whatever colour you go for, just start with the darkest colour as the base, because you can always highlight it as you're going along. I use Scab Red to base coat the purity seal as well, and actually, if I'm being honest, whatever colour you do in the cloth, the Scab Red for purity seals is perfect for making it stand out. For the metal armour, buckles and the sword blade, I use a base coat of lead belcher. Again, it's a dark silver colour, but this adds to the grim darkness of the theme of the character. We always can come back to highlight it at a later step anyway. There's very little skin on this model, which is actually, I think, only the face in this model's case. So the base coat I used was Bugman's Glow, but feel free to use a darker or lighter colour depending on where he's from. He might be a bit of a learned character, so maybe he's a bit of a bookworm, so using a lighter colour might be the best, or maybe he's been down south exploring in the Tomb King's land, so he might have a bit of a tan colour. Whatever the choice, it's up to yourself. For the zombie, I used the base coat of Flayed One Flesh. There is rotten flesh as well. The choice is up to yourself again. You just want to kind of represent something that looks kind of like a dead or decaying body. The zombie's trousers were painted Capuchin green, and the shirt was based using a regal blue. But feel free to change these colours to those of your rivals if you want to add a bit of banter during your battles. I also used the Capuchin green for the vial on the Witch Hunter's backpack. My thinking is it's going to be a health potion, or it could be something perhaps a little bit deadlier. Finally, any areas which are going to be gold, such as armour detail and the sword guard, were based using auric armour gold. So we're moving on now to our first bit of dry brushing. It's important when you are doing dry brushing to get rid of a lot of the excess paint on your brush before you begin. I tend to use a piece of kitchen roll to remove most of the paint from your brush. I know Citadel do palettes specifically for this, and I actually used one of their specialist dry brushing paint brushes to make this stage easier. So when we're dry brushing, we always want to start with the largest part of the model, which is the leather. So to bring out some of the raised areas, I used the paint Steel Legion Drab, which is a light brown. Once that was dry, I used a thin wash of watered down Chaos Black over the leather and metal areas. Now, there's a lot of specialist washes available from Citadel. I think the one is called Known Oil, which will have a similar effect, but I have the Chaos Black and water is fairly cheap, so we could just mix it down, water it down, and it worked fairly well. Another dry brush of light brown was then painted over the leather. I used XV88 for this. It really made the raised areas stand out and creates a range of shades on the leather. I then dry brushed the zombie's skin using pallid witch flesh. And for the cloth, I used a really thin layer of blazing orange just to get on the raised areas to start adding some volume to it. Once the blazing orange had dried on the cloth, I did a thin down wash of Scab Red on it just to slightly tone down the orange, because as you can appreciate, the orange would have been slightly too bright. At this stage, I find it's a good idea to go ahead and touch up any areas of cloth, skulls or parchment that got a bit of paint on during the previous stages. Again, I just use Zandri dust for these parts, as I find this is the best for bringing out parchment. For the Witch Hunter's face, the raised areas were just highlighted with a dwarf flesh. And once that was dry, a wash of Reekland flesh shade was then painted over the face of the Witch Hunter, the zombie's flesh, and any of the gold areas of the model. For the raised silver areas, I then highlighted it using Stormhost Silver to pick up the detail. And a layer of Ushabti Brown was used to bring out the detail of the inner coat cloth, scrolls and skulls. I Dry brush highlighting of rotten flesh was then used to make the raised areas of the model stand out more. And then for the backpack vial and zombies trousers, a highlight of goblin green was dry brushed onto it to add sort of an extra degree of detail to it, a range of the colours. Then on the witch hunter's face, we picked out some of the extreme raised areas using Kislev flesh. A wash of scab red was then used on the exposed bits of the zombie's flesh and mouth to add a bit of colour to the deathly grimness of the zombie. And a final highlight of Korax white was used to bring out the raised areas of the skulls and the scrolls. At this stage, I also decide to add a bit of blood from scab red. A bit of blood using scab red onto the sword blade that has just been thrust through the zombie. Again, I believe there is actually a technical paint that Citadel do now, which is like a gory red paint, which would probably look a bit more of a realistic blood. But I'm using what I have to hand, I suppose, in this case, and I think it looks fairly good. The finishing touches of the model are then came down to doing a watered down wash of Steel Legion drab, which was applied to the skull and the scrolls and the cloth areas to add an extra bit of shading. Now this wash was very watered down, it was almost beige in terms of the brown level of colour on it, but the slight change of colour really does make these areas appear realistically worn. For the Witch Hunter's beard, it was based using Steel Legion drab, and highlighted the raised areas were highlighted with XV88. But again, the tone of the hair is up to you. You might want to have a blonde or ginger or even a grey-haired veteran Witch Hunter. I did a thin line of Korax white to try and make the gritted teeth stand out, which I think looks well. And I also used the Korax white for the model's eyes as well. And pupils were then dotted on using Corvus black. Now, I'm not an expert at painting eyes, and you probably see by the finished model that there could be areas to improve on there. However, I'm sure as you get through it and you paint it, you would actually make yours look a bit better. But eyes, for me, seem to be my Achilles heel. So I'm sure you probably have one yourself, but we live and learn, and I'll work on that anyway myself over the coming months. Now I have a gloss varnish which I actually use on the sword blade gore and the purity wax seals, and on the zombie mouths and the vial to really make the liquidy sort of the waxy nature of these areas stand out. As I said before, Citadel do have a technical paint which actually does look like blood, but in this case, I have a gloss varnish to handle. I knew I could make it kind of look gory enough that way. I also did a thin down wash of Assaman blue on the zombie shirt to add a slight bit of shade into the model. Now for the base, I actually got one of the new technical paints from Citadel, which is called Sterland Battlemire. It really does make the base look realistically muddy, and it does look pretty cool in my opinion. Just make sure when you are using it, or if you do decide to use it, just to make sure you add a bit of mud onto the model's boots or feet in the zombie's case, just to show that they weren't just placed on a bit of mud after going through a fairly clean city street. So look, I think it's looks fairly realistic at this stage. And there we have the finished model, and yeah, it's not too bad. I'm happy enough. This is one of the first models I've painted for a long time. Definitely some techniques need to be worked on. However, I'm happy with the finished results, and I'm going to be using this in my tabletop games and role-playing games in the future. So that's the end of the guide. Hopefully it was useful to you guys. If you want to find any more guides or want to post pictures of your finished model, then feel free to do so at lookingfordm.com. And like and subscribe, and talk to you soon.